Go. Okay. Welcome everybody to the Redlands Camera Club program tonight. We have an excellent speaker tonight. I'm so excited. And his name is Cole Thompson, and he is uniquely qualified to talk to us on the topic of
Cheryl,
photography.
Cheryl,
Yes,
uniquely unqualified.
uniquely unqualified. Thank you for that correction. See, I see you as totally qualified. Okay, so in his own words, this is what Cole has to say. I've never taken a photography class or a workshop. I don't have a degree in art. I've never worked as a photographer. I don't have a gallery representation. I'm not a Canon explorer of light, and I only have 3 lenses, and none of them are primes. Do I have any qualifications? Just one, my images. Nothing else matters. So Cole, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to throw the screen over to you.
Oh, there we go. Hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to come and speak to your group. I'm from Northern Colorado, currently on the Oregon coast, and I am an amateur photographer. As Cheryl just mentioned, I've got literally no qualifications as a photographer. I'm self-taught and proud of that fact. And I've been asked to speak this evening about vision, passion, and portfolios because this is, I guess, one of your new competitions that you've got coming up. So let's just jump into my presentation. I'm going to take questions at the end, and let's just get started. See me, Cheryl?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. And can you be sure to mute everyone, Cheryl? And I'll unmute myself.
Yeah, Dorothy's on top of that one. Thank you.
Still haven't got the mute all yet, so I haven't been able to unmute myself.
You're unmuted.
Oh, I see. Okay, there you go.
There we go. Thank you so much. So vision, passion, and portfolios. That's what I'm going to speak about. And first, let's just start with what is a portfolio, sometimes called a project or a body of work. Portfolio is simply a group of images that are related or tell a story. And I love working in portfolios, but it wasn't always that way. For the longest time, for I would say 40 years, I was a photographic grazer. I said I just went wherever the grass was greener. And I created a lot of greatest hits. They were good images, but they weren't related in any way. Well, a few years after that, I decided that I wanted to submit my work to Lenswork. And I hope you're all familiar with this publication. I consider it the finest photography publication on the planet. And the submission guidelines were very simple. They said send 10 to 25 images on a single subject. And then they said in very large capital letters, do not send us your greatest hits. Well, I thought to myself, he's never seen my greatest hits. And so off they went. And they came back within just a few days with a handwritten note that said, pick one image and send me 15 on that subject. And that was the very first portfolio I was kind of pressured into. And the first project was grain silos. Now, I live in Northern Colorado. I live on the edge of the Great Plains and at the very beginning of the Rocky Mountains. And everywhere you go are these incredible grain silos or grain bins. And so for 9 months, I traveled the plains looking at these silos and trying to see them not as objects of utility, but rather as objects of art. They're at the heart of every small town. and they're at the center of every family farm. And so that was my very first portfolio, the first one I submitted to Lenswork, and the first one I got into Lenswork. And my takeaway from that first portfolio, I love projects, and I don't know why I resisted working in them for so long. And now, when I don't have an active project I'm working on, I'm just a little bit lost, and I'm always looking for a new idea. Here's some of the portfolios I've created, well, since 2004. Melting Giants. This is a portfolio about the icebergs that come along the coast in Newfoundland, where they break up and they die on the shore as 30,000-year-old ice cubes. Monoliths started here on the Oregon coast. It's about these great sea stacks that just dot, especially at Bandon Beach, just dot the beach. Hotel rooms is a new project I've just started. I spent so much time in hotel rooms, I challenged myself to find one great image in every hotel room that I stay in. And it's just something that's fun and that keeps me busy. Windmills, a relatively new project. Isolated. Isolated is a simple project about isolation as expressed through trees. Harbinger, my favorite portfolio. This is a series of single clouds over the landscape. I've got a real passion for this project. Moy Standing. This is the Moy of Easter Island and the 30 remaining standing Moy on the island. The Lone Man, a project about how people become still and pensive when they stand on the edge of the earth and they look out into the great expanse and feel very small. Negative Intersections was a very different project that I did during COVID when I really couldn't go out and shoot as much as I wanted to. And it's the idea of what happens when the positive and the negative intersect. La Jolla is about La Jolla Cove in San Diego, a place that I've spent many a day both diving and photographing. The Dunes of Nude. These are close-ups of sand dunes, which always reminded me of the human nude, shot primarily on the Mesquite Dunes in Death Valley. Linny, a portrait of breast cancer. Linny was a customer who insisted that I photograph her and share these images with others. The Road to Nowhere, a project about roads that seemingly lead to nowhere. Self Shadows is just a fun project, like the hotel rooms. Wherever I go, I always photograph myself in shadow, something I think a lot of us do. Again, another fun project. The Dahlia. This is a project centered around a single dahlia that I found discarded at a greenhouse. Beauty in Death. Fluid water. I always found it strange that we portrayed water with still images. So this is a series of long exposures in water. Another location-based portfolio, the Faroe Islands. For those who don't know, it's a group of 18 small islands between Norway and Iceland, a very isolated, rugged place. Death Valley. I've been going to Death Valley since 1969, before it was even a national park. It's one of my favorite places on earth. And a recent project, light poles, one that I'm still working on. Ancient stones. And many others. Initially, my presentation was going to be just about portfolios. But then I realized that if I only spoke about portfolios, I could leave you with the wrong impression. that the key to a successful portfolio is having a unique idea. Now, I have a friend who believes this, that the key to a great photo or a great portfolio is the unique idea. But ironically, he also believes that everything has already been done and that there are no new ideas or unique ideas. So that leaves him in a quandary. Well, one day he calls me up and he says to me, frozen chickens. And I'm like, what? And he said it again, frozen chickens. And he said, no one has ever done a portfolio where there's a frozen chicken in every image. And he thought that because this was a unique idea, that it could be successful. And believe me, while a unique idea is a good thing, his approach wouldn't work for me for two reasons. First, it's contrived. And second, it would be designed to please others. And I believe in creating from vision and passion. In fact, I believe my best work comes at the intersection of vision and passion. So let's start off by talking about vision. My favorite quote on vision comes, ironically, from Helen Keller, who said, "It's a terrible thing to see and have no vision." Of all the things that I have done in my life to improve my photography, finding my vision has been the most impactful by a factor of 1,000. More impactful than any equipment I've purchased or any of the looks or techniques or styles I might have used, more impactful than any rules or conventions that I've followed by a factor of 1,000. Let me repeat that, by a factor of 1,000. So vision, what is it? Is it a style that you develop? Is it a look or a technique? Is it a creative talent that you're born with? Is it something that some people have and others do not? Well, it turns out that it's none of those things. Vision is simply the sum total of your life experiences that allows us to see the world in a unique way. Imagine if you could take everything that you have learned in life, everything that you've experienced, everything you've been taught, and put that into a blender and take that mix and cast lenses that you then saw the world through. And what you see through your life lenses is your vision. It is simply the way you see. And that's unique to everyone else in the world. Now, vision is not learned or developed. You can't take a course on vision and come out with a certificate and your vision, but rather vision must be discovered. And I use the word discovered purposely because the greatest truth that I learned about vision was that we all have one. You can't not have a vision. It is simply your point of view. Why is vision so important? Because it's the difference between an average image and a great image. Vision is the critical element in a great image and one that many photographers overlook. I did for over 35 years. So how did I find my vision? I didn't even understand what vision was. So how could I find it? Well, I did the most logical thing. I Googled it, how to find your vision. And all I came up with was articles about my eyesight. So without any guidance, without any instruction, I just came up with 10 steps that I thought instinctively felt would help me find out if I had a vision. Here's a few of the things that I did. This first one was really critical, I think, looking back. I printed out my favorite images and I sat on the floor and I divided them into two piles. Images that I really, really loved and all the rest. Now that might sound like a very simple assignment. Who doesn't know what their favorite images are? Well, I didn't. I found myself so influenced by what others thought. I was influenced by the most popular images or my images that sold the best or got the most likes, that I couldn't separate what I loved from what other people loved. After I divided them into two stacks, though, I asked myself, what does each one of these images, what is it about them that I love? I didn't ask what they had in common. That wasn't important to me. And I learned there that I loved dark images. I loved contrasty images. I loved centered subjects, symmetrical images, unusual images. And those were all clues to my vision. Next, I committed to never again creating work that I didn't really love. If I saw the world's greatest sunset that I knew would sell, would get lots of likes and win in contests, but I didn't have a passion for that image or that subject, I wouldn't pursue it. It's what I call creating honest work. Next, I practiced photographic celibacy, a very controversial idea that very few people agree with. But I don't look at the work of other photographers. And why not? Well, I found myself being influenced by what others were doing, and I would copy their style, their look, or even copy their image. And I reasoned that if I was going to find my vision, I needed to stop immersing myself in the vision of others. Another thing that I did, I simplified. I simplified my equipment. I got rid of the gadgets. I simplified my post-processing so that I could focus more of my time on the creative side, on my vision. And one of the really hard one, I ignored other people's advice. Everybody has advice about how I should have created an image or what I should do with it. And I started trusting myself and listening to myself. I changed my mindset from photographer to artist. As a photographer for over 40 years, I had developed these rigid rules about things that I could and could not do. But now as an artist, anything goes. And one of the hardest one, I questioned my motives. Why am I creating? What do I want to get from my photography? I think everyone should ask themselves, why are they photographing? And I stopped comparing. Comparison is the thief of joy. When I looked at other people's images, I would say, why didn't I see that? I wished I would have created that. And lastly, I stopped caring what other people thought of my work. I said, if I could create an image that I loved, that needed to be enough. And I did some things to inspire myself. I had read The Fountainhead, and that gave me great direction about what kind of artist I wanted to be. I read Edward Weston's day books. I read those annually because his thoughts about photography and creating an art were so powerful to me. And strangely enough, when I listen to the Beatles, I get inspired as I see how their music grew and they continually changed and tried new things. Now, it took me 2 very long, very hard, gut-wrenching years to finally find my vision. And along the way, I became so discouraged that I almost gave up. I just was convinced I didn't have a vision. The problem was I was looking for a very complex answer. And it turns out that vision is so incredibly simple. And once you find your vision, you think, how could I have not seen it? It was there all along. Vision is simply how I see when I ignore all those other external voices telling me how I should photograph. Now, it's always hard to understand what vision is through words. So I'd like to show you some before and after images to illustrate what vision looks like. The before image will show you what I saw with my eyes. The after image will show you what I imagined as I stood there. And I always like to start with the angel Gabriel, because this image was the very first time that as I stood there, I could see the final image. I was photographing on the Newport Beach Pier in Southern California. You guys know, in Southern, I'm so used to speaking to people back east. And I was on the pier photographing. And it was an interesting shot of this pier. Lots of people were walking by, but I was using a long exposure, so they disappeared. And while the image was interesting, it was lacking something, a subject. So I looked around for someone that I could ask to stand in my image. And I saw this homeless man, and he had just reached into a trash can and pulled out some uneaten French fries and was eating them. So I approached him and asked if he would stand in my photograph, I could take him to lunch. And he agreed, and he wanted to hold his Bible. And it turns out that his name was Gabriel. So I called the image the angel Gabriel. And then I took Gabriel to a very nice restaurant. And as we walked in, imagine I've got this homeless guy with no shoes, filthy clothing, and matted hair. And as we sat down and looked at the menu, I said to Gabriel, order anything that you like. And he said, I'd love a steak with mushrooms and onions. I haven't had one in years. And when the waitress brought the steak, he picked it up with his hands and ate it. Gabriel had been a drug addict, but was now clean. And he was a delightful fellow. And it turns out that he is Romanian. He and his father had escaped Romania, and I'm half Romanian. So we had that in common. And as we were getting ready to part ways, I learned that his father lived nearby. And so I said, Gabriel, give me your father's name and address. And if I sell any of these images, I'd be happy to share a portion with you. To which he replied, give it to someone who can really use it. I have everything that I need. And Gabriel walked away with his only two possessions, a bedroll and that Bible. This is the before and after image. I was brand new to Photoshop when I took this picture. Didn't know hardly how to use it at all. But the great thing about having a vision is that it became this roadmap for me. It was a way to guide me on how to shoot the shot and how to process it. And with that map burned into my memory, I could take all the time in the world that I needed to learn techniques to finally turn what the eye saw into what my vision saw. This image is called Skeleton, and it's a pile of bones laying along the river in my hometown. And as I looked down on those bones, I could see this great dark image with these leaves, dark leaves with the white bone shining through. The problem was my eyes didn't see it that way. They saw these bright leaves and bright bones. And again, I had to learn some techniques to be able to transform what the eye saw into what my vision saw. This is Windmill and Moonlight, and this was shot above Grand Island, Nebraska. Very cold, very dark night. It had just snowed, and then the sky had cleared, and the moon came out, and it was so bright that it was impossible to get a single shot that would allow me to capture both the sky and the foreground. So I shot this with two images and cut and pasted the two halves together. I don't know if that's the right way or the best way, but it was a way to turn what the eyes saw into how I envisioned it. This is from my series, The Ghost of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And when I went to Auschwitz-Birkenau, I didn't know how to create ghosts, but I had this vision of what I wanted to do. I remember there were a couple of ghosts in the angel Gabriel that they had lingered for just 2 or 3 seconds. So that gave me the idea of how I might do it. And I think of all my before and after images, this is the furthest apart of the two. But again, with that image burned into my mind of what I wanted to do, I learned the techniques needed. This is from my Melting Giant series. And the reason I love to show this image, all of the images in that series were long exposures. But this iceberg was rocking so badly in the surf, I couldn't do a long exposure. So I simply took a still shot and I said, I'll find a way to turn it into a long exposure later. And I did. I found a technique that made it look just like all the other long exposures. This is from my series, The Lone Man. It was at Zabriskie Point in Death Valley, the before and after. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but this was a very odd fellow. He was walking around the platform at Zabriskie Point, and he had a skeleton tied around his neck over his back. He was wearing it like a sweater. And then later he went up to this peak, and I saw him and began to photograph him with a long lens. And it was interesting because he knew I was watching him, and he was just kind of staring me down, a very odd fellow. And that's how the before and after turned out. This is from it's a power plant up along the Jim Bridger power plant up along I-80 in Wyoming. And that was shot on a very cold midday sun shot. But my vision saw it as a very dark, almost night-like shot. Now, it's easy to look at my before and after images and come away with the wrong message. A lot of people will ask me, how did you do that? And I'll explain to them because my techniques or my methods are not a secret, but they might have the wrong idea that if once they know the technique, they could create that image or a similar image. And really, it's not the technique that made that image. It is the idea or the vision. Here's another one from my Ancient Stone series, shot primarily in the Alabama hills out by Death Valley. You can see that's a vast difference between those two images. And the Lone Man from La Jolla, California. Back in the day, I had to use ND filters and stack them because they didn't have a wide variety. And so we would get a lot of vignetting and a lot of color cast to the image. This is one of my favorites from my Power Line series. And here's the before and after. I use a lot of techniques to simplify my images, such as dodging and burning and extreme contrast. And another from my Power Line series. That's my most recent portfolio. This image is from Hana in Maui, and the before and after. Now, whenever I stand before a scene, I always in my mind can see what the final image would look like. It's my vision. It becomes a roadmap or my guide. And the problem is there are other voices in my head besides my vision. Questions or voices such as, how would Ansel have shot this? Or what might win me a ribbon in my club? Or how did my mentor tell me I should do things? Should I follow the rule of thirds? How have I seen others shoot this same scene? And when I listen to those other voices, my vision recedes. But when I listen to my own voice, it gets stronger and more dominant until I don't even hear those other voices any longer. I've learned to listen to and to trust myself. And another important lesson I've learned is don't follow other people's advice, especially about your vision. When I created the Angel Gabriel, I was so proud because it was the first time that I had envisioned and executed. So I took it to my mentor at the time, showed it to her, and immediately the first words out of her mouth were, don't center the subject. Cole, I'm always telling you this, don't center the subject. And I was in a quandary because that's how I saw it. That's how it felt to me. But I also had great respect for my mentor. So I went home and I tried cropping it differently. And I hated it. She may have seen it this way. She may have done it this way. But it was my vision and my image. And I learned a great lesson. There are no experts when it comes to your vision. Now let's talk about passion. Jay Micel said, if it doesn't excite you, why would it excite me? And I've got people who write me and they say, I just can't get excited about my project. I'm stalled. I can't go anywhere. What should I do? And my advice, find another project. You need to be passionate about what you're shooting. It just can't be a unique idea like my friend's frozen chickens. I recently had a woman write me and tell me that she just had this real passion for these garlic scapes. They're, I guess, garlic shoots. And she said, but I just don't think it's an appropriate fine art project. And I thought, my gosh, if you're that passionate about it, it is the perfect subject for a fine art project. Because unlike my friend, you have real passion for it. So here are two of my projects that were born from the intersection of vision and passion. Ceiling lamps. This is a story about Akron, Ohio. I was back visiting my mother, and I was staying at a local hotel, and I walked into the lobby, and I just happened to look up and saw this ceiling lamp. And I don't know why, but at that moment, it just struck me. I was fascinated by it. So I pushed the table out of the lobby, out of the way, and I lay on the floor looking at that lamp. And then I began to shoot it. And I started doing this everywhere that I went. I would try to find these unique lamps that look so unusual when shot from straight below. And I just had a real passion for the project, and I knew how I wanted to portray it. And a lot of people might not even know these were ceiling lamps if it weren't for the title of the project. And I began combining them in different ways. This one in the upper right is my favorite, Del Taco in Newport Beach, California. And I just had fun with the project. And on my last trip to Moscow, I was able to add these three Soviet era ceiling lamps. Now, an interesting twist on this. 3 years later, I was back visiting my mother again, and I stayed purposely at the very same hotel because I wanted to see that same lamp that started it all. And I walked into the lobby, looked up, saw the lamp, and my reaction was, huh? I don't get it. Whatever it was that sparked that inspiration and passion that first day was gone. And if I would have seen it on that day, I never would have pursued the project, which taught me a very important lesson. When you feel it, you must act right then. Don't say, I'll come back tomorrow or next week, because you may not feel the same way. Here's another very passionate project, Moy, Sitting for Portrait. When I was 17, I read all the Thor Heyerdahl adventure books. But my favorite was Aku Aku. It was about the trip to Easter Island and the secret of Easter Island. And so a few years ago, my wife and I were creating our bucket list. And I just happened to say out loud, I'd love to go to Easter Island, but of course that's impossible. And my wife, not knowing any better, said, why is that impossible? And so the next year off we went to Easter Island. Getting to Easter Island is not easy. We flew from Denver to Toronto, down to Santiago, and then out to Easter Island. They call it the most isolated, inhabited place on Earth. And on that long leg of the journey, I had fallen asleep and had a dream. I dreamt that the Moy were living beings, and I had taken two giant stands and a big roll of backdrop paper and had set up an outdoor studio. Then I went from Moy to Moy, asking them to come and sit for a portrait. Well, what I didn't appreciate was that the Moy had been so poorly treated by outsiders in the past that most just refused. Some said they were too old or too infirm to make the journey. Even the younger ones said they didn't want to come because they had disputes with other clan members they didn't want to run into. So after issuing the invitation, I wasn't certain if any would come. Well, the day and hour came, and at first no one did come. But then later, slowly, some of the younger Moy came and sat for a portrait. And as word got out of their positive experience, more and more of the Moy came. Well, I woke up from that dream and told my wife about it, thought about it for a bit, and then said to her, I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask the Moy to come sit for a portrait. And I did invite them. And they did come. Now, of course, the Moy didn't come to me, but rather I would photograph the Moy under cloud cover. Then I would outline them and drop them onto a digital backdrop that I had created. I did it under cloud cover so I could then dodge up highlights, making it look like they sat under studio lighting. Now, keep in mind, I've got no experience with portraiture or studio lighting or anything of the like. I really didn't know how to do it, but I had a vision, and that drove me to learn the techniques needed to pull off this project. And it's one of my favorite projects because it was a childhood dream to visit Easter Island. Now let's talk about portfolios themselves. Why do I love working in portfolios? You know, it's fun to shoot greatest hits. You just wander about and you look at something, you get that, that greatest hit shot, and you put it on social media and you get a lot of likes, and it's fun. But it doesn't really focus you and it doesn't cause you to think deeper. When you're working on a project, you really have to think deeply because it's easy to get the easy shots, but then you got to look deeper and find additional shots that are different or unique or say something. So it just really it focuses me. How do I pick a subject? Well, I always look for inspiration. Uh, Several times in my life, I have been inspired where an idea comes to me, and I just feel like something is saying, you must photograph this, or something you're passionate about, something like those garlic scapes for that woman who wrote me. Are any subjects off limits? I don't think there are really any rules. I think anything that inspires you, anything that you have a passion for, is something, especially something that you should pursue. How long do projects take? Well, I think there are no rules. I used to believe that great projects took 20 years, and I do have some projects that have taken that long. But I've also had projects that took 2 hours, The Ghost of Auschwitz-Birkenau, 12 hours, my project Trees from a Train, 9 months, my first grain silo portfolio, and Monoliths and Dunes of Nude, I've been working for well over 20 years. So really, they just take as long as they take. How many images do you need for a portfolio? I don't think there's any rules. I like to have 15, but that's really up to you. Can I mix color and black and white? Can I mix verticals, horizontals, and squares? I think it would be crazy for anyone to say you should do this or you shouldn't do that, because it would stifle imagination and doing something different that no one else has ever done. So I say do whatever feels right to you. Now, here's an interesting one. Can I start by going through my old images and put together a portfolio? You know what? You can do anything, but here's been my experience. Cobbling together a portfolio from past images just don't work. It's a compromised collection. I like to start from scratch, to be purposeful, to have the idea and to move forward, not look backwards. And I believe there's a difference between a collection, which is what you do when you just go through your images and say, oh, I'm going to put together tree images, and a portfolio. And I do on my website have collections. They're just groupings of similar subjects. But I really think that a looking forward portfolio is better. Can a location be a portfolio, like your Death Valley or La Jolla or even your Faroe Island ones? Certainly they can. But I think those are the weakest of my portfolios. I like a portfolio that has an idea or a theme. Should all images in a portfolio be a 10, a greatest shot? Well, I don't think that's possible. Not every image can be a 10. I mean, when we're shooting greatest hits, we want a 10, so you get a lot of likes or you win something or you sell something. But imagine a play where every person in the cast is the lead. It doesn't work. You've got supporting cast and you've got a lead. And that's how I look at my images. They're all important for the whole body of work, but they're not all necessarily a 10. How do you show or present portfolios? This is a hard one. Do you do it through social media? I think it's a very poor way to exhibit a portfolio, because people on social media, they're going through images quickly. They say that the average person spends 3 seconds an image on social media. It's not a place for people to sit like in the old days with a book and to really look at the images, study them, and ponder them. You can try your website, and I certainly do that. I have my portfolio page. Another option is prints. I do sell portfolios in a small portfolio box. This is an off-the-shelf portfolio box that you can purchase for a relatively inexpensive price. My Ghost of Auschwitz-Birkenau, which I tend to sell through to museums, this was a handmade box that I've had made in New York City using old school techniques. And it's a very, very expensive, but a very nice box. and it opens up. And I usually include a set of white gloves for people to look at the images with. Another way that Brooks Jensen promotes is a portfolio PDF. And that is where you put your images together in a PDF that you give away for free. And I've got a number of those on my website. And what's nice is that it's kind of like a digital book, and the resolution is much higher, and it's something you download and have on a bigger screen, say a large laptop or your desktop. And I really like that approach because it's easy to distribute. And again, it's free. How do you know when your project is complete? I just know. I just feel like it's done. Maybe I get bored with the subject, or maybe I just have a feeling, but I'd like to believe that you just know when it's done. Are there any rules when creating a portfolio? I don't think so. Again, rules are stifling and they stop something creative from happening. Now, if you're submitting to a particular like say Lenswork, there may be some rules that they impose and you'll have to follow those. But as far as creating them, I say you do what your gut and your passion tell you and your vision. Here's some more portfolios and their stories. This one's called Ukrainians with Eyes Shut. My son was stationed in Ukraine in the Peace Corps. And so my wife and I went off to visit him. And I never prepare when I go to a new location. So I didn't study about Ukraine. I didn't look at what the must-see sites. I didn't buy a guidebook. I just went and trusted I would see something that would inspire me. Well, I got there and I was about there for 3 days and I wasn't seeing anything. And that started to worry me because now I'm counting down remaining days, putting pressure on myself to find something and be creative. And that's never helpful for the creative process. The people in a foreign land are always interesting, but whenever you ask to photograph them, you always get the same thing, the big smile or the mask, as I call it. And you don't really have the time nor a common language to get to know these people and break down those barriers. So I was at a bus stop thinking about this problem, and there was this old guy leaning against the wall. And so I approached him and I tapped my chest and said, America. And he nodded. And I held up my camera and I said, photographer. He nodded. I then did the universal sign for, can I take your picture? He nodded. And I took his picture. Then, using sign language, I said, stop, close your eyes. And he scrunched his face up as if to say, what? And I said it again, close your eyes. And I took his picture a second time. And I liked what I had gotten. It got rid of the big smile, the big mask, the big camera face. And I felt like I was getting to the real person. And so for the next 10 days, I walked the streets of Ukraine and using sign language, I asked people if I could photograph them with their eyes closed. A homeless man in a city park, a grandfather collecting water at a sacred spring to take home to his ailing wife, the groundskeeper of a monastery that once had 1,000 monks, but that day had a single monk left. And this is on the banks of the Dnipro River, and I doubt it's still standing. It's currently on the front lines of the war in Ukraine. A Cossack playing for money on the streets of Lviv. And this is Natasha. Natasha lived in Berislav, just above the dam that the Russians blew up. And Natasha had been evacuated by the Russians and her Western passport confiscated, which meant she couldn't immigrate to a Western country. But Natasha was able to escape into Poland, where she obtained a new passport and was able to return to her home in Berislav, where she undergoes daily bombings, no running water, no heat, no electricity. And then in Lviv, when I was photographing, a little old man, 5'0", came shuffling up to me and in very broken English asked what we were doing. And I explained, and he turned and left without a word. A few minutes later, he came shuffling up to me and said in very broken English, can I take your photograph? And I said, sure. And he goes, with your eyes closed. And he took my photograph and emailed it to me. And I was grateful for that experience because believe me, you've got to be trusting to close your eyes for a stranger on the street. Here's another project that just came out of a burst of inspiration. I had lived in Alaska in the 1970s, but never returned. I never went back for a visit to visit old friends, or I never took my family there on vacation. And I always regretted that. Well, in October of 19, just before COVID hit, a friend called me up and said, I've got a 2-for-1 ticket deal and I'm headed to Alaska. Would you like to join me? And I jumped at the chance. And I didn't know what I wanted to do there, but we were landing in Fairbanks. And I'd heard about this great train ride that goes 12-hour train ride from Fairbanks to Anchorage through some of the most remote and isolated parts of Alaska. So we jumped at the chance. And on that day, we had this wonderful snowstorm. And the first thing you do when you get on a train is grab a window seat, get your camera out, and start looking for something to photograph. Well, I quickly realized this was going to be a real challenge. I'm basically in a speeding train going through a tunnel of trees at 50 miles per hour in a blinding snowstorm. There really wasn't a lot to photograph. So instead, I went between both cars and I opened up both doors and I started shooting outside of the train. And the only thing there to photograph were the trees. So I started shooting the trees. Then I started panning my camera with the trees. And then because I love long exposures, I thought, what would happen if I used a long exposure and I panned with the trees? And my first shot blew me away. It was just this incredible swirl that I couldn't understand. And for the next 12 hours, I just played with the swirl, trying to control it, trying to learn how to make it look different, and just had a real blast. And I really didn't understand the swirl, as I called it, until I got home. And I realized it came about because of all the combined motions. We got the trees going one way, the train going another, me panning with the trees. But the real secret, the focal plane shutter in my SLR. Most of our SLRs have a little slit that moves from top to bottom. And this top to bottom motion combined with the sideways motion creates the swirl. And even though I understand it intellectually, it's still difficult for me to understand how this tree can stand still with 360 degrees of swirl. And that was on a recent cover of Lenswork. Another project that came about from inspiration. First let me preface. I had read The Fountainhead when I was 17 years old. It was really influential in my view of how to create uniquely, how to be an individual and not follow the herd or the crowd or the rules. Now, fast forward to the 2010s. I'm in San Diego. I'm in downtown and I'm in rush hour traffic, stop and go. And the car in front of me has a tinted window. And I see in its reflection the building behind it. It was all distorted. And I thought, wow, I would love to be able to photograph that. So I went home and talked about it with my wife, and we were discussing, how would I do that? Would I walk around San Diego looking for tinted windows that I would photograph the reflection? And my wife came up with the idea of the funhouse mirror, or a Faro type plate for us darkroom guys, a flexible metal mirror that I would take and distort and then photograph the buildings in its reflection. And I had to lay on the ground because the mirror put me in the image. So I had to get below it. And so I just traveled most of the major cities in the Midwest and West, photographing these buildings as distorted, I don't know, vision of a futuristic scene, I guess. Just had a blast with it. And I named it the Fountainhead in honor of the story of the Fountainhead, which was about an architect who followed his own set of rules. He didn't follow what others wanted him to do. Really had a passion for this project. This is my latest project, and it's kind of an embarrassing story because I first shot my first power line image in San Francisco in about 2002. but said to myself, this would not be an appropriate fine art project. It's mechanical, it's man made. It's just not really right for fine art. And so I ignored it. And then about 5 years later, I shot another Power Lines in Minneapolis and again said, it's mechanical, it's man made, it's just not appropriate. But then I found myself continually being drawn to these Power Lines. And then when COVID hit, and I spent my time wandering out in four corners, just always drawn back to these Power Lines. And finally, I said, I need to follow my own advice. I'm passionate about this project. I love it. It needs to be a portfolio. And so here recently, I completed the project, and it was also featured in Lenswork. And then finally, perhaps the most inspired I've ever felt on a project, The Ghost of Auschwitz-Birkenau. When I was in Ukraine, we had a couple of extra days, and my family and I discussed it and decided we'd go next door to Poland. Took a train ride over there, and we stayed in Krakow at the city square. And we were discussing what we should do with our time. Now, I knew that Auschwitz-Birkenau was nearby, but I didn't want to go there because I'm an empath. I take on the sad feelings of a movie, a book, or a place. And I sure didn't want to go to a place called a death camp. But the family outvoted me, and so off we went. We took a tour bus over to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And on the ride over, I began to think about where I was going. And I thought, surely if there's a place on earth that is sacred, this would have to be one of them. And so I thought it would be disrespectful or even sacrilegious to treat this as a tourist location. And I decided not to photograph there. As we got off the bus, I asked the driver if I could leave my gear on board. And he said no, he wouldn't be responsible. And so fortunately, I began the tour with my gear in hand. The tour begins by being shown a book with a picture of each person and a description of their belongings, education, etc. And as I studied that photograph, I could tell that this was a skilled photographer. He took pride in his work. It was really a good photograph. All of them were. And in the first 5 minutes of that tour, my head begins to spin. Why are they so carefully documenting a person that will either work to death or murder? Why? Then they took us into the room with the iconic piles, the pile of glasses, the pile of human hair used to stuff mattresses and pillows, and the one that got to me, the pile of human bridge work yanked from the mouths of the dead. I'm not claustrophobic, but at that moment, I could not breathe in that room. And I signaled to my family to continue the tour that I was going to go outside and catch my breath. And once outside, I just walked slowly, looking down at my feet. And as I began to breathe easier, I began to think about where I stood. Who else had stood here and was now dead? Who else had walked in the path that I was walking on the way to the gallows or the gas chamber? Then I wondered, metaphorically, if the spirits of those who lived and died at Auschwitz-Birkenau still lingered. And then a voice just said to me, I needed to photograph their ghosts. And so I began photographing ghosts. By using the other visitors at the camp and a long exposure, I had those people stand in proxy for those who lived and died at Auschwitz-Birkenau. But I faced two challenges. Each time I set up my camera, the people would move out of the way, not wanting to ruin my shot. So I had to very quickly devise a technique. And what I would do is I would turn my back to the camera. I would put my phone to the ear and play the part of the loud American and speak very loudly into my cell phone. And once people returned, I used a remote shutter release to get the shot. The second challenge I faced, I only had 45 minutes left at Auschwitz and then an hour at Birkenau. And I knew I would never be back. I could never come back. But I had these images in my head that I wanted to capture. So I Once being concerned about being disrespectful, I've now found myself running from location to location, trying to document these images that I could see. This is the only image that I included that had a living person in it. And it had a very specific meaning for me, but I never tell people what they should think. I create from my vision, but I also believe the viewer sees through their vision. And then finally, the gas chamber with the ghosts escaping. I couldn't enter that chamber. One of the great blessings that have come into my life because of this portfolio is that I've been able to meet over 100 survivors and hear their tales. I was at the Dallas Holocaust Museum. They just built a new gallery, and I was the first exhibit there. And it was opening night, and I was entertaining guests. When I saw this woman, Edith Molnar, being pushed in a wheelchair from image to image. And as she got to each image, she would lean very far forward and closely examine the ghosts. And so I went up to her and I introduced myself. I said, "Hi, my name is Cole, and these are my images." And Edith Molnar raised this crooked, arthritic, distorted finger, and it was shaking, and she pointed and said, "These are my images." Edith Molnar had been interned at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and I couldn't imagine what thoughts might have gone through her head as she looked at those images. Now, finally, an embarrassing story. The Ghost of Auschwitz-Birkenau was popular by any metric. It was published, it was purchased, it got a lot of likes. It was popular. And I had a lot of my friends write me and say, "Look, you've hit a home run. You need to take advantage of this while it's still hot. You need to do another series, another ghost series, maybe the Ghost of the Killing Fields or the Ghost of 911, whatever, but do another project." And I would resist and I would say, "No, I'm not feeling it. I'm not inspired to do it." But over time, they convinced me. I gave in and said, "Okay, I'm going to do another ghost project." And we had been watching The Tudors on television, the miniseries, and had fallen in love with the castles of England. And so we decided I was going to do a project called The Ghosts of Great Britain. And so off I went to Great Britain with my camera, my 13-year-old daughter, and a white bedsheet. I was going to have her be my ghost and spin around and walk around and be my ghost. And I created a great number of images, came home, processed them, and realized that I hated the project. I ended up throwing all the images away except for this one that I did like. The problem was the project was contrived to take advantage of the popularity of the Ghost of Auschwitz-Birkenau. It was a marketing scheme. There was no inspiration, there was no vision, and so it failed. And my wife pointed out maybe others might have loved it still. The problem was that I didn't love it, so there was no way it could be a success, because my definition of success is to create images that I love. Summary. I love working in portfolios. It focuses me. It's more fulfilling than greatest hits. Find something that you're passionate about. And if you're not passionate about it, don't consider it. An inspired portfolio is always better than a contrived portfolio. And really important, follow your vision. If you haven't found your vision, find it, get in touch with it. And finally, are you working on a project? If you've never tried one, here's a simple idea of how to get started. This was an idea developed by Brooks Jensen, who publishes Lenswork. It's called Seeing in Sixes. And he challenges people to just create a very simple portfolio with 6 images on the same theme, related images, stories, images, things that tell a story. And that's a great way to get started. And I guess that your minimum for your project, I saw that submission was 12 to 16, I think. So maybe that's where you start also. But I've found it very rewarding. And since that day of my first project in 2004, I've probably created 25 different portfolios. So thank you very much. And that concludes my presentation. I'll stop my share. and invite you all to unmute yourself and I'd love any comments you have or any questions or any experiences that you've had in creating your own project.
Cole, I hope you can feel the love from the Redlands Camera Club because the chat is blowing up with hearts and thumbs up and wows. So thank
Well,
you for your presentation.
thank you. Thank
I'd
you.
like to say something. Cole, first of all, I really, really appreciated all the text that you included in your presentation. I have subtitles when I watch movies, even in English or shows now, I have subtitles on, and it just really made it clear. That's just like a little like management thing, but please keep doing that because I know I'm a teacher and I know a lot of my students really enjoy need like the visual and the auditory at the same time. So that was just one mechanical thing I really liked. But I just really, really liked your message, and I, like other people in the chat, really found it moving, especially the images from the concentration camp. But I just wrote down, here's the words that I heard. It's very inspiring. I heard question, explore, play, connect, try, get down to find a new angle, ignore the rules and the voices that are in your head from other people, be present in the moment, learn as you go, love what you create and find a passion. And I think it's really good because you obviously are very skilled, even though you say you're like that you're self-taught or whatever, but it's really encouraging. I'm sort of new to this, but it's kind like I've been in the camera club 2 years and I'm still learning to use my camera and I mostly use my cell phone. But like it's nice to know that you learned these things as you went on. You had a vision like, okay, well, how do I do this? Let me try Photoshop and let me figure out how to do what I already is in my head. So I just found that part really, really inspiring. So like I thank you a lot, and I've already signed up for your on your website for your newsletter. So I will continue to be inspired by you. But thank you so much for this. It's really great.
Thank you, Heidi. You know, I run into people all the time who tell me that they need to learn the technology of photography first because it's only through the tech they can express their vision. I have to tell you that I disagree with that approach. I believe in finding the inspiration and vision first. And then I say, what tools do I need to execute my vision? If you were to see my post-processing routine, it's 6 steps. It is the simplest you will ever see. And I never add another step, another tool, or another technique unless it's needed to express my vision. And I'm passionate about that approach. We get too caught up in the tech and we don't spend enough time on the creative. And that's what I did for 35, 40 years. I was out of balance. And so I tried to simplify everything that I did to focus more on the creative. So thank you. I love your summary words. I've learned to just sit here for a while because I know somebody will speak up if I sit long enough.
Well done, Cole. Very, very well done. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Any questions, any comments about portfolios?
There was a question earlier in the chat about whether or not to digitally sign your photographs for a portfolio.
Well, again, there are no rules. You do what you think best. But for me, this might sound strong, but I think it's sacrilege to put something over my image. I view an image as something very sacred, so I do not put anything over the image. Yeah. And I don't do that on any of my images on the website. I'm not that concerned about people stealing my images.
Hey, Cole, thank you for the presentation. My question is, how do you define passion?
Here's how I define it, especially if you're a working person, because I never worked as a photographer. I had a day job. Passion is when you're skipping out of work early so you get some shots in before the sun goes down. Passion is something you're constantly thinking about, something that you can't wait to shoot an additional shot, to go out looking for it. You know when it's there. And the opposite of passion is where you're just stuck and you go, oh man, I just can't get motivated. And it just sits there dying because you're not working on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And Thank you for helping us to believe in ourselves. And I enjoyed your presentation very much, and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. You know, believing in yourself is such an important thing because we sometimes think there are experts that we should listen to. And I did that for much of my life. I followed convention or followed rules, but you know, there's something inside you that says, no, I don't care. Like, I got to tell you, people forever have told me, quit centering the subject. I love centered images. That's who I am. People have always told me, open up your shadows, get more shadow detail, shoot to the right. No, I like the dark image. That's who I am. And I love this Dorothea Lange quote the best. She said, I already had settled it for myself. And so praise and criticism both go down the same drain. When you know what you want to do, neither praise or criticism affects you because you're confident in your vision. Okay, I know there's one more question out there before we do one final thing.
So, Cole, I noticed that most of your images are all done in black and white. Is that how you do most of your portfolios then?
Not how most of them. That's how I do every image I create. I don't shoot in color, period, except for the raw color file that I use to create a black and white image. I am 100% black and white. Yeah.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed your presentation this evening. It was well done. You provided a lot of passion, vision, and thoughts for our members to think about and look at. A very nice presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Russ. Before I go, I always give away a print of the angel Gabriel because for me, it's a special image. It's the first time I had exhibited my vision. It's the first time I really spent time with a homeless person. It changed my whole outlook and approach to how I deal with homeless people. And so I would like to give a print of the angel Gabriel away. And how I do that is that I look for the person who's got a birthday closest to today. So who's got a birthday today? Anyone? Okay, who's got a birthday, say the week prior to today or a week coming up, a week within today? Got to unmute yourself if you're speaking up. Okay, how about 2 weeks, anywhere near today, this month?
Well, I'm back in June, so if anybody can beat me there, that'd be great. But
June what?
June 22nd.
Okay, June
I'm
22nd.
July 20th.
There has to be one of you that are closer to that than I am.
I'm in November.
No, that's pretty close. November what?
November 25th.
Oh, that's about 2 months. Can anybody beat Michelle? What were you?
July 20th.
I'm November 23rd.
We have an October 24th in the chat.
October 24, who? Speak up, October 24.
Hey, that's me.
October 14.
Ooh.
Oh, I've been beat.
Although
Michelle,
I
don't. Who's closer, Michelle or October 24?
October 14, Deborah.
Okay, can anybody beat that? Closer than that? And steal, it's kind of like a white elephant gift. You'd steal it from Deborah. Go ahead.
I'll beat her, but she can have.
Oh, no, if you're
Okay.
closer, take it.
Does somebody have a closer date?
No.
Okay, Deborah, I think you're the winner.
Thank you.
Oh,
You
nice,
email
Deborah.
me with
Pardon?
your mailing address, and I'll still be here for the rest of the month, so it won't go out till I get home in early October.
Okay. So
Okay, thank you so much.
That's sweet.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Cole.
Thank you.
Oh, applause from
Thank
anybody?
you.
Bye.
Thank you
all.
so
Very
much.
nicely done.
Thanks for the invite, Cheryl. Take
Yes,
care, everybody.
absolutely. We just
Good
have
night.
a couple of announcements before we close out. So let me share the screen again. Don't forget, this is how you can sign up for the portfolio if you want to bring your portfolio to our camera club. And then this is our program feedback, and this QR code does work. And if you can fill it out and give us some feedback on tonight's presentation, we would very much appreciate it. And I'm going to throw it over to Russ for any closing comments.
Well, I think all that's been said has been good. I don't have any closing comments. Just please make sure that you if you're going to do a portfolio, make sure you get it turned in by the 3rd of October. So that way we have time to process it. And if you have trouble or issues in doing that, just give Cheryl myself a call and we'll help you through the process. Okay? So, by the way, Cole, there were 30 members that tuned in tonight, just to let you know.
Thank you. And who was it who won the print?
Deborah said,
Right.
Deborah, be sure to email me, please, with your address and information.
Okay, I put it in the chat, but I
I
can
don't
email it.
have.
I can
have
grab
it.
it from the chat and send it to you, Cole.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Okay, I am
get
going
that from the
to.
membership list too. Again, thank you, everybody. Any other comments from anybody? Any questions at all? Well, I hope you all have a good evening and thank you so very
You
much.
too, Russ. Thank you, everyone.
Deborah,
Bye-bye.
Dorothy,
Really
thank
good.
you. And Cheryl, thank you very much. And Cole,
Good
thanks for
night.
the wonderful
Good night,
presentation.
guys. Thanks, Cole.
Night.
Bye-bye.
All right. Good night now.
Right.